Blender for Noobs.
Hello, this is Dan Nobles and welcome to Blender for Noobs and welcome to this video on how to create bump maps. The reason I'm making this tutorial is every once in a while when I'm trying to model something and I want to use bump maps, it seems like I always got to go back and kind of research it a little bit to try to get the best bump map that I can get. And I watched other tutorials and there's some pretty good explanations out there on how to do it, but it goes like from the old way to the new way and doesn't really explain some things. And I think, at least in my opinion, it should be simplified quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a simple cube and I'm going to create some simple bump maps so you can see the general process of creating bump maps and see how it reacts. And then you can take that information and transfer that over to what you're trying to do. Because if you're like me and you see bump maps on some models and you say, oh, that's really, really cool, it must be really hard to do. It's not hard to do at all. It's very, very easy. So let's go ahead and try this. So I'm just going to do a Shift A, go to Mesh, and I'm just going to create a simple cube here. So there's our cube. I'm going to scale it up a little bit. So what we need to do in order to put a bump map image on this cube is we need to texture it. And we need to also UV unwrap it in order to texture it. So what I'm going to do is right now I'm going to start with UV mapping. So to do that, I'm going to tab into edit mode and I'm going to select down here, I'm going to select my edges, come down here, and we need to mark the edges so that we can unwrap this cube. Now, if you're new to unwrapping or even if you've unwrapped a few things, the way I like to explain unwrapping or, marking your seams unwrap, you want to try to get your 3D object into a 2D object. And the easiest way to think about that is think about a pair of scissors. What cuts would you need to make to this cube in order so that you can lay it out flat? And I'll show you where you would cut. So I'm going to select this edge right here, this edge right here, this one here, and this one here, and this bottom one right. Actually, let me select this one right here. So if you think of this as like scissors that is cutting along these edges of this cube, if this was a paper cube, then this area right here, this flap, you could just peel off and it would lay down, and then the sides would lay down, just like a cardboard box. So in order to mark these, I'm going to go into the edge menu, Control E, and I'm going to choose Mark Seams. When you do that, you can see that if I select off of it, you can see that they turn red, so you know which seams are marked. So that's a cube is probably the easiest thing to UV map or mark your seams to UV unwrap. So let's go ahead and unwrap this. I'm going to come over here to this window, come to our properties, and I'm going to choose UV Image Editor. It brings up our little grid here. And come back over to here, A, select all, and then just choose U to unwrap. And I'm just going to choose the general unwrap. And as soon as I do that, you can see that it's done exactly what I wanted it to do. It's laid this out completely in 2D. Looks just like I want it to, so that's good. Okay, so now at this point, in order to get an image on this texture, you could actually go in, you could say image, you can choose open image, and you can put it behind this, and it would show up. Since you have it unwrapped, it'll actually show up on your object. You can go into texturing and do all that. But what we're going to do, I want to put specific images on these squares. So I'm going to save this UV, come over here to the UV menu, and I'm going to come up here and choose Export UV Layout. And I'm just going to create a directory here of where I'm going to put this. So I'm going to create the bump directory, and I'm going to call this just, let's call it bump test. And when I scroll down here, we got some options that we need to look at. We want to export all UVs. I'm going to leave it in the PNG format. I've tried JPEGs, I've tried TIFFs. They all work fairly well, but I'm going to use PNG. The size for this, I'm just going to leave the 1024 by 1024, fill opacity 0.25, and that just shows you the actual lines of the UV image. And we're going to see those squares. So 0.25, the default, is fine for that. So I'm just going to export UV layout. Okay, so I've exported this layout as an image. And basically what you're doing is you're using this layout, this UV layout, as a reference in order to place your images where it's going to appear on this cube. So then what you need to do is you need to open your favorite graphics program. This could be Photoshop, GIMP, or whatever you're comfortable using. In this case, I am going to open it in Photoshop, and I've opened this image here. Now this isn't the exact image that I just created, the UV image, but it's exactly like it. This one I created before just to test it out. But this is what it looks like. You have this UV image of our lines. The reason you're seeing these lines is that 0.25 default that we had on there. So what I'm going to do is, or what I have done is I've added some images to these boxes. So let me just unhide these so you can see what they are. Okay, so this is what I've created in these little box areas, and this is what's going to show up on the cube. And this is all for the testing of the bump mapping. So what we have here on A, we have this cracked texture, which, you know, is kind of a nice, really like almost like a clay, you know, cracked surface. And that's really nice, you know, to see if you can see the indents of these cracks on a bump surface. And then what I did is on B, I took this and I did some work to basically desaturate it and run it through a high pass filter and made it more like a grayscale, because when you do a bump map, they say that the best thing that you can do is it has to be more like a grayscale. And then that'll be your bump map, and then you add, you know, mix in your actual texture to create it correctly. Then what I wanted to do is I wanted to test what it would look like if, you know, we have very sharp defined bumps and indents on here, because when you think of bump mapping, it's not just something that's looks like it's sticking out of an object. It can also be something that looks indented. So when you think of bump mapping and the difference between black and white, think about a black hole, and that will help you realize that the white is something that's going to bump outward and the black is something that's going to indent inward. It's like when I think about it, I always forget, okay, which one do I need to make? Which color do I need to make it here that's going to bump out? So just think of black hole. A hole is, you know, goes down, it's indented. So that will hopefully help you remember. Another thing that I did, not really by intention, but I created these, I wanted to put these letters on here and I made them different, you know, white and black, which turned out kind of nice because that way I can see also the letters, how they were reacting, you know, whether they were bumping out or indented. And again, you know, the A should be indented, the B should bump out, the B and C should bump out, and the D and E should be indented. And then on the spinal panel, what I did is I kind of blended it together a little bit because I wanted to see if it would get that gradual bumpiness rather than a sharp defined bump that these should get. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this image. File, save as. So in our bump directory, I'm just going to drop this down to the format. I'm going to change this to PNG, and I'll just leave it as bump_texture and click save. Okay, so we go back to Blender, and now we're ready to start our adding our texture. So I'm going to tab back into object mode, come over here and go into the node editor and choose N to get rid of that menu there. Come over to our texture or our materials, and I'm going to choose new material. So immediately you can see it's starting to give us some nodes here. And I'm just going to call this material bump. And I'm going to leave this default diffuse here, and I'm going to come over to the node editor and start working a little bit here because we need to do a little bit of work in here in order to get this to display correctly. Bring this down so we can see what we're doing. Okay, diffuse is fine. I'm going to leave that there. But we need to add the texture in the bump texture. So I'm going to choose Shift-A to add a node and go to Input, and I'm going to choose Texture Coordinate. And this is really just to be legal. I find that as long as it's UV unwrapped, it seems to work okay, but The correct way to do this is to add a texture coordinate, and also Shift A. I'm going to come down here to vector and choose mapping. Bring this up. Now the mapping is a nice way. Once you have your textures on here, you can play around with these values, and it can change how many times these textures are mapped across your object, and also you can play around with the location of where it's mapped, all kinds of good stuff. Normally, if you got something simple like this, you don't even have to play with mapping, but it's there if you need it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the UV into vector. Okay. Now we need our texture image to map onto, so I'm going to choose Shift A, go to Texture, Image Texture, and we'll put it right here. And the vector, of course, just goes into vector. Okay. So I'm going to take these two, Shift select these two, and G move them out a little bit. And now I'm going to use a bump node, Shift A, and I'm going to go to, again, vector, and choose bump. Now this is our bump node here. Now this bump node came out, I believe, in version 2.65. Somehow I missed it. I don't know how. But I don't see very many people using this. At least I don't see very many tutorials on it. A lot of people are still doing it the old way, which I'll also show you. But this is kind of nice because it's specifically for the bump mapping. So in order to plug this in, what you need to do is choose color, and you just plug this into the height like so. And then you have a normal, and now you have this normal setting here on your diffuse on your BSDF materials. So I'm just going to choose normal and plug it into normal there. So really, we're pretty much done, except we need to tell it what texture to use. So we come back to our image texture, choose open, find our image texture, and it's bump underscore texture is the one I named this one. So plug that in there, and everything's plugged in. So if we come over here, and if we choose a Shift Z to go into our rendered mode, you can see we're already seeing some stuff. Now I got some world settings on here that is not very attractive. So I'm going to come into my world settings, and I'm just going to blank these down a little bit so we can see this better. And let me see, come back over here. I'm going to add a lamp in here. Actually, I do already have one, the sun here. Let me see what power it is. Choose use nodes, so I'll get a strength. Not very powerful, but I'll choose 3, make it a little bit brighter, and maybe I can angle it a little bit more. There we go. Just have to find out which way to angle it. Okay, so we can look at this cube now on our bump map, and that actually looks, I don't know how it looks to you, but to me it looks pretty bumpy. I can see very clearly that the D in the circle is indented, and we go back to our graphic, then definitely, because it's black, remember black hole, indented, so those are indented. And our A cracked surface, we have the A is black, so it's indented, and these cracks in here are black, or at least darker than the surface of this, so those are indented. So that's looking pretty good. If we want to look at the others a little bit, I can do, let's see, no, I don't want to do a G. RZ to rotate, and we can see our C. These are actually bumped out, so we know that the C in the circle should be white, right? So we can come in here, and indeed the C in the circle is white. That's why it's bumped out. So it's working correctly. And just as a side note, so it's pretty cool that we can see this indented thing here and this bump here, but really, how are we seeing this? Because if we look, do like a edge-on view of this, there's really no indent there. There's no geometry on this cube that is, causing this indented or causing this really to be bumped out. So how is it exactly that we are seeing this? Well, the reason that we're seeing this, and you may already know this, but it's just basically because of how we're used to seeing objects in the real world. So when you see something that is bumped out like this and the light is coming down from the top, you'll see the edge right here as shiny and you will see the bottom as dark. You know, it's got a shadow down here. So that tricks our minds into thinking, oh, that's sticking out. Same thing with the way the light's hitting this. You have a sharp shadow that's going around the circle and around the D that indicates that this is actually indented. So it's pretty cool. Even though the geometry is not there, it gives us a nice way to add very cool texture to our objects in order to just really enhance the quality of our model. So let me go ahead and let's rotate this some more. RZ, what do we have over here? Didn't have anything on that square, so okay, this is the E square. That's just E indented, and then the circle is out. So I got a black E and I think this is the one that was kind of like let me see, it was a gradual one. Yeah, so definitely a sharp, you know, indent on the E, but then the circle is not so sharp, or shouldn't be as sharp. Okay, so let's go look back at our cracked surface again, our view A. Okay, pretty cool, but right now, all we have plugged in is the bump mapping. We don't have our actual texture. So in order to bring our texture in there, what we can do is we will take these three nodes, shift select them, choose Shift D to duplicate them, and I'm just going to bring them up like so. And I'm going to take the color node here and bring it down and plug it into the color on the diffuse, and bam! Now we have some color, and we're mixing in our bump node with this. Now once we do that and we look at our object, we can see that, you know, hey, wait a minute, when I plug that in, I can still see a little bit of bump, but it's not quite as pronounced as when I didn't have this extra image. That is because what it's trying to do is it's trying to take our image here and it's trying to combine it with the bump map. Also, like what I was saying before, what you want to do is you want to take your color texture image and you want to plug it in to the one you can't see right here because the light's not right, but it's the kind of the grayscale bump. So another thing to look at here once you do this is come to your bump map node, and you have the strength and distance that you can play around with. So just to kind of exaggerate this, if I click on strength, I just bring this all the way down. You can see there's not much there. But if I click in this and say something like 10, then wow. I mean, you can really see the difference there. So it's not only picking up these big cracks, but also it's looking at all these minor things that you're seeing in between. So we're going to bring that back down. Let's just make it like 3 for right now, just so we can see it. And then the distance, you can change this quite a bit. And what this does, if we take the strength all the way down, you can see that the distance is really, when you start bumping this up, it's starting to pick up a lot of the other detail that it doesn't normally see. Actually needs some strength in there. And then with hardly any or no distance on it, you can see that it's picking up the main stuff, but nothing really in the individual stones. And then you pick up, you know, bump up the distance, and you're starting to see a lot of those pieces come through, even though the strength isn't turned up that much. And then you can turn up the strength, and then you really start to create some inner cracks in there. So I'm going to leave this at, I don't know, 1, and this one at 0.1. And then we have something like that. Okay, I said I was going to talk about also the old way to create the bump mapping. Some of you who may have done bump mapping before and you've done it the old way using the displacement, you may be thinking, okay, well, we have this new bump node, but why would we use this rather than the displacement method? Well, here's the thing, okay? You can still use the displacement method, but what the displacement method is going to do is, because you're going to your material output directly, you're not using the bump node, you're taking your bump map and you're applying it to your material no matter how many layers of texture you have on there. So for example, let me try to explain this. Say if I have this cube and I want this texture on here, which is, you know, all these cracks, and then I say, okay, I want a bump map also, so that's another layer on there. And then I say, well, you know, I need some specularity on there as well. So I use a specular map on there. And then whatever else maps, you know, that you need to apply to your material. What you're doing is you're creating a multi-layered material. And what the bump map does, it allows you to bump only the area that you want to bump. It limits the bumping, in other words. So if you have things on here, like if you were using specular material, something that's very, you know, shiny on here, you could have that not affected by the bump map if you wanted. Where, like I said, if you use the displacement option, then you're taking your bump map and you're applying it, you know, just all over the complete material. So just very quickly to show you how to do the displacement, what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to shift select these three, do a shift D to duplicate, bring these down here. I'm going to come in here and select these nodes and choose M. What that does is mute them. So M, they're all muted. They don't, they're not doing anything right now. You can see our bump mapping, or I don't know if you can see this on YouTube, but the bump mapping has disappeared. So in order to do it the old way, you have your image texture the same way like this. But what you do is you do a Shift A and you come to color and you add a mix RGB node. You put it right here. Let me zoom in here so you can see it. And you take your color and you move it over to this bottom color here, and you change the mix to multiply, and then you take the color and you drive it directly into displacement. So then the way that you would adjust the amount of bump on the object is you would come down here to the multiply and change the factor back and forth. In fact, let me go ahead and let me cut this off right here so we can see it a little bit better. So you can see, in fact, let me cut this one too just to show you that it is this displacement that is affecting the cube right now. And you would come into multiply and you could adjust it. I mean, that is, you know, nothing there at all. And then you can adjust a factor to get the depth of your bumpiness. So again, you still can use the old method, but the bump node gives you a way to control exactly where the bump is going to, you know, what material the bump is going to affect. So in this case, it's going to affect my diffuse material once I turn these back on. So cut that one. M to unmute these. And you can see we're back in business. So I hope that helps you with creating your bump maps. Like I said, they're really, really, really easy to do. I mean, it sounds like something that would be difficult, but applying your bump maps like this is not hard at all. Probably the hardest part about it is, you know, get your UV map and creating your actual bump map. There's several tutorials online for Photoshop and GIMP and all that on how to create a bump map correctly. I played around with it different ways. I get different results. So I really encourage you to look and see, you know, what is the best way for you to create your bump maps. There's actual programs out there that you can use in order to create images that are specifically supposed to be for bump maps. And just very quickly, and as a reminder, this B area right here, even though it's very hard to see, if I scroll over here, you can see that this was created as an actual bump map that would be used. And then this is the actual material. So in reality, what you're supposed to do is take this A material and you would say this image has your bump map, the gray kind of image. And then you would take this material here. Oops, if I could get the right one. That's the crack color here. So I just move that down, and this B would be gone, and this one here would be gone. So then you would have, in this area, you would have your actual, what you would call your image texture, and you would save this out as a different file, and then go back into Blender and come up here, and you would plug your image texture into here. So in this case, instead of using that same file that I used down here, I would open up this area right here and use the actual color image texture and combine it with that grayscale true bump map. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, let me control up arrow so you can see this. This is the setup that we have here. This one's using the bump node. And then this one, if you want to use your displacement, you can still do that by just plugging in this like so. And I'm really glad Blender didn't explode when I just did that. So I'm really using the bump map, and I'm also my bump node and also the displacement in order to do this. So really something you don't want to do. But anyway, so this has been bump mapping, hopefully simplified and demystified for you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them. I'll try to answer if I know the answer. If I don't, then I'll try to find the answer. And so it's not hard. I mean, go out there and create your textures, create some nice bump map textures for your model. What it does is really make your model come to life, or help your model to come to life. And also remember, be subtle about it too, because if you create a bump map and you say, I really want this to, really, you can see that it's indented or you can see that it's popping out. That's not necessarily the best thing. A lot of times, if you have subtle hints that there is indentions or something, say if you have a rusty surface and you can barely see that there's, some indentions in there, just like in real life, when you look at an object, you don't always see drastic indentions in the surface or whatever, or bumps in the surface. Be subtle about it, because the idea is to make it as realistic as possible. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.